Hello everybody and welcome to the third Future of Work webinar. We spoke a little bit about Agile teams on the last webinar and I thought I'd move on to Agile leaders this time. And we'll take a little look at command or coach, lead or empower, and we'll give you some practical hints as a leader as to some of the kind of things that you should be taking on board and putting into action. As I said last time, we took a look at things like market disruption, technology disruption, all of these things that are causing businesses to move from a current state, a current organization, into this future organization. I had a few questions after the webinar, and I had a great conversation with an organization here in the UK. And one of the questions that came out was, this is fantastic, but if I am making all of my teams agile and I'm giving them all of the power, the decision making, what is it that I should be doing as a leader? What's left for me to do? And that raised this very simple question: how do I lead agile teams? So I thought we'd take a look at that today. You'll have seen me on several of these webinars before. My role's fantastic. I get to meet lots of customers, so lots of you. I go and talk to analysts, take part in events, and bring all of that knowledge back to the business, share some of it with the business, and I absolutely love sharing what I find with you guys as well. So again, please feel free during the session here to put in your questions and comments into the chat feature, and we'll see what we can do to answer some of those at the end. As always, I like to get an expert opinion, and I'm really pleased today to be joined from Cologne in Germany by Matthias Frey. He's regional manager of Questback Central Europe. Matthias.
Yeah, hello everybody. Thanks Scott for having me here today. I'm really excited about it. A little bit of background: I'm leading the Central European region for Questback for some time now. I've been leading virtual teams in the past. I have several manager roles and leadership roles in the past, but obviously as Questbackers, we also talk with a lot of customers in the HR function about leadership, about future of work, about agile teams. And so I think maybe I can share a little bit of insight and some practical examples. I hope you're going to enjoy this today.
I mean, just noticing there as well that you've worked for businesses that are based in different countries, and it would be great perhaps to bring some of that perspective in as well. We do get an international audience here, so if there's examples that come from different sort of regimes, really, I suppose, in terms of different regulatory environments, almost in the workplace, that would be great to bring some of those in. So the question: how do I lead an agile team? And my thinking a little bit around this is there are three things that we should take a look at, and we'll dive into these in detail as we go through. And again, Matthias, it would be great if you could challenge these, bring some real-world examples, and really help to illustrate and bring these to life, particularly in your role as a leader. I think this would be really important. And it would be good to, we're transforming, aren't we, at Questback, and we see some of these things as well. First of all, leadership at all levels, and we'll go into this in a second. We need to really think about the entire business when we are thinking about leading an agile team. Secondly is the change of role for a leader. We came into this because organizations are looking to increase the agility of their organizations, making their teams agile, and I think that really means a change in role for an individual leader, much more from being a commander to being a coach. And there's a few more things that we'll take a look at as well. Lastly, how do you gain trust? How do you make sure that the entire workforce comes along on this journey? And as a feedback company, you would expect us, of course, to be talking about feedback. We think this is a fundamental ingredient. So first question, Matthias. In the businesses that you speak with, is this a common challenge? Is it a common path that you're seeing amongst some of these customers?
Absolutely. I think although it has been a word which nobody wants to hear anymore, digitalization and future of work, I think it's still true. And the reality is you don't do this in order to become a more successful leader. That's the opportunity for sure. But I think there's also a downside that if you don't do it, then you will probably lose some of your success. So I think as leader today, you need to change. And I think the leaders are also critical for organizations to change their culture, because it's the leaders who actually form the culture and build the culture. And if we want to develop as an organization, become more agile, obviously the team structures and the teams need to be more agile, but that requires a change of leadership, and that's what we're talking today.
Is there a sort of a sweet spot in terms of the size of the company or the style of the company?
No, I don't think so. Large companies are going through this, and for them it's quite a challenge. But if I look at, for example, German mid-market companies, a lot of them are very innovative in terms of machinery, in terms of the products they offer. And there are global players as well, maybe not so large, but they have a very broad market, and we see this in other countries as well. So I don't think that only large companies have to change. I think it's mid-size and small companies as well. It might be easier for smaller companies, but for the individual leader, I think it's as challenging. Some of these leaders are very successful for 20 years in leading with maybe some more traditional leadership styles. And so dropping something you have been successful with for the last 10 years is more difficult than changing when you have trouble. But I recommend strongly to change now and start that change and continue with this change. A lot of people are changing constantly, of course, and go with this actively, because the speed of change, and we know that through different factors, is also increasing.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's something we can all agree on. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Let's sort of dive down into detail on these three different things. Firstly, leadership at all levels. A little bit of a busy slide here, but I wanted to put as many job titles as I could think of, just for people watching and listening, just to have a little bit of a think that, you know, for me, leadership exists at all levels. I mean, here at Questback, when we do a leadership survey, this is not just giving opinion on the senior management team. This is really for every team to give feedback on their manager, their leader, and of course we roll up those results to look at trends and differences. But you know, we're absolutely passionate in believing that leadership exists at all levels, and those teams being empowered to take decisions in the moment as well. I suppose, does that mean you should have different levels of agility? You know, is the agility that you can have, you know, in a team that's sort of at the bottom of the organization, if you want to look at it that way, is that different to, say, the senior management team who are trying to be agile? Do they have different granularity of sort of agility, do you think?
Well, I think first of all, maybe we need to talk about how do we define agility? Is it just moving fast as a team, reacting fast to new challenges, being able to quickly adopt, or is it actually what we know predominantly nowadays from IT business to systematically apply Scrum methodologies? And then your question is, can I apply Scrum methodology in a senior management role or as a senior management team? And I think you get to different answers, obviously, then. But I believe you need a level of agility in all functions and at all levels, same as culture. If you want to change a leadership culture, obviously top management, senior managers need to actually show the way by going first, which is one of the saying at Questback. But culture also develops from the bottom up, and it's not just top down. Therefore, I think it's very, very critical if you talk about agility, agile culture, agile leadership, that all levels are included, that you actually do measures and actions changing everyone's daily life and work life. But obviously, you need to start with the top management and define agility for your organization. What do you want to achieve? And we have recently heard about application of Scrum methodologies outside of IT functions, which is quite interesting. So that's an angle to look at when you talk about agility.
I think the other thing as well is, you know, we naturally fall into the language of hierarchies still. I used it, you used it, and we have different levels of like that. I think there's a real dynamic around agility as well, which is that sort of project team, that tiger team, that cross-functional team that comes together to solve a particular issue, to drive through a particular project, and exists for a while until it's achieved what it needs to achieve, and then it disbands and forms again in some other way. So, you know, there's a sense of organizational agility around that as well, I think, that applies.
Very much.
Let's have a look at you know, thinking about the individual leader here, playing different roles.
Yeah, that's something that I feel is a good illustration to show what's changing. I think if I'm today a leader or in a leadership role, then I have different hats to wear. Traditionally, I think the managerial hat is very, very important. Prioritization of the work, organizing the work, setting up processes, defining interfaces with different departments and different teams. That was a traditional task of a manager, and they would have been approached for and needed to be the super specialist on all business matters, and they needed to know everything. And I think that part of the role is actually getting smaller. Knowledge is delegated to the teams, and the organization and prioritization is delegated into the teams themselves. But then as a leader, you need to probably do what I think is true leadership, which is much more inspirational. You're setting the goals, you're giving a strong vision. You're also articulating and showing and leading a culture. And I think that's a very, very critical part of leadership, so that people in your organization, people who work with you, have some orientation of what to achieve and how to best approach things, resolve conflicts, or know what to do in critical situations. And then obviously the coaching part is very important, whether it's a long-term coaching to develop your people, or whether it's coaching in a problematic situation, whether it's overcoming some obstacles that you can address in that coach role. I think that's a new role which people, I think, have to learn to step back and not be the one who knows everything, but only ask questions, and finding the right hat in the right situation is another part of this challenge, and makes the leadership role more interesting because it's different and it's not the same, but it's for sure a big change in terms of the expectations from team members, the expectations from organizations towards leaders. And if you think about this, you can wear all these hats without even having people reporting to you. Sometimes you have maybe a very senior role and you're leading a product management team, for example, or you're leading product management, and then you have developers who are not reporting to you, or you have other people contributing to what you're doing in your initiative. But you still have to wear all these hats. And that shows that I think specialty careers are becoming much more important than the traditional career of adding people to your leadership span.
Yeah, I think that's right. And sort of bottom right here, we have becoming a great team player. So, you know, that's quite a shift from being a leader that's, you know, sort of outside the team and managing, leading inwards, and actually jumping in. I think the balance that has to be struck, though, is that, you know, if you jump into the team and you see an issue that somebody's struggling with, there is often a temptation to sort of elbow them out of the way and say, I know how to do that, I've done it 100 times before. But you know, really what we're striving for here is, you know, sitting next to somebody and saying, right, well, let's take a look at how we could solve this problem. And then that person's enabled and they're developed and they're getting greater fulfillment. And to me, that's a much more effective way of building and leading an agile team.
Yeah, and then often you don't have to jump into the team. You're probably already sitting in the middle of the team, trying to catch up what your team is doing. And that's a completely different picture than before. I mean, you said about this notion of hierarchical visualization. I think it's better to put the team leaders in the middle of the team and not on top. So
Yeah, I again, just calling on an example. I remember working at one place where my job title was product director, and somebody once said to me, "Scott, for product director, you don't know much about the products." I said, "No, but you guys do. What I know about is the organisation and the customers, and that's really important." And so sometimes even even your job title and actually what you do, you are delegating that knowledge. I like that concept. Let's take a look at sort of, I suppose, bringing people along on this journey. It's a big change for a leader as an individual. You're leading change in many ways. You're changing the way in which progress is made. You're empowering people in the team to take decisions. Something that's really important is if you're empowering people, you have to still make them accountable. And if you're giving them, the real ability to make these decisions without support, then that can be disastrous. So this isn't sort of giving up on things. It's really wrapping this fabric around. And I think for me, it's sort of listen actively and listen often to the team, and really be open and transparent when you share that feedback. And that's something that we live and breathe. And again, is this something that you see a lot out there in industry? Have you got examples of companies that you're working with that have moved to this much more transparent approach already?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we are involved in quite a number of projects with our customers where exactly that transparency, that continuous listening is very, very critical. But I think it starts with honesty. The leader will never be a perfect leader, so maybe you state, this is an area where I want to develop, and then you follow up with that, and you listen to your employees and people you work with. Am I successful on that change? Have I done something great? And then also help them to understand, if I fail, that's probably a good thing, because then that's an opportunity to learn. And I think without transparency, people will not understand what you're trying to achieve, and you will not understand whether you have achieved it. So I think it's impossible without that transparency.
Yeah, I think you have to understand the impact of the changes that you're making. So giving people decision making capability, but then not giving them the right resources, or giving them the ability to make a decision that affects other parts of the business, and not going and talking to the other parts of the business. You've got to be really cautious of those kind of things. So suddenly you're listening to your team, but you're also listening to other teams out in the business. I think that's important. There's a phrase that I don't know, I've struggled with it for about 30 years. Somebody once said to me, "Oh yeah, you learn by your mistakes." I don't know. I hate that. I suppose I like to try to get things right in the first place. Of course, I'm only human, etc. But I read a variation of that a couple of weeks ago, which was learn by other people's mistakes. I kind of wonder where you stood on that.
I actually, personally, I like learning from my mistakes, from our team's mistakes. I don't have an issue with that. I think making mistakes is part of working, and if you work hard and work fast and you make a lot of decisions, then you make mistakes, and that's completely fine. And if you don't create a sense that that's okay to make mistakes, then I think you create the wrong attitude towards working. It's more than cover your ass and all these, oops, I shouldn't have said that, cover your back mentality. And that's not something which is positive and motivating. So therefore, I think it's natural to make mistakes, and it's absolutely fine to learn from them. We, for example, as an organization, we have revenue targets, we have growth targets, and the best example I've ever heard with that is we have achieved maybe, let's say, 80% of our revenue targets in a quarter. And obviously it's not a great quarter then, and we're not happy about it, but you have two ways of handling that situation. You can ask your team, why didn't we finish with the 20%, and what was missing to achieve the remaining 20%? Or you go into that and say, look, what did we do well? Obviously, 80% was successful. We closed 80% of the business. What can we learn from those 80% and apply it to the other cases which we didn't win? And how can we learn from the positives and do more of that, rather than trying to eliminate the things that went wrong with the cases that we didn't win, with the business that we didn't get. And I like that thinking. And if you want to apply that to your own business, you have to live that. Don't talk about it, just do it. And I think, I mean, it's also a little bit of a phrase nowadays. Walking the talk is very, very important as a leader nowadays. So
yeah, and I think that sort of brings us back full circle, really.
yeah.
You know, the organization has to support those teams that go first as well. If we're being more agile, we're doing, you know, devolving power more, you know, there will initially be some kind of gap, I'm sure, between, you know, the ability to take a decision and the capability, and it takes time to close those up. Now, whether you close them up by making mistakes or observing others, or just addressing them, you know, yourselves, as you've said, in a very positive sense. You know, the business needs to have that little bit of flexibility to move from the rigid structures that ultimately at one level are putting the business at risk, down into you know, making the changes which will turn the business around. And you've got to start on that kind of journey. And it's, you know, as I've said, you've got to bring the workforce along on this journey. As I was writing that, I got to thinking, do you know what, if the teams themselves are thinking we've got to change because we see what's happening, and we all know that the front line often knows more than the senior management in terms of the day-to-day workings of a business. They might start this journey themselves, and so actually the roles get reversed. The workforce has to bring the leadership on the journey, I think sometimes. Right, so maybe an example of one company that we're working with, Matthias, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, so this company is a global pharmaceutical company based in Germany, and they are going through this process of more flexible work structures. They move away from strict hierarchies. They have moved away from that. They have more team organization, and within that dynamic culture, they realize they do annual employee surveys, but it's not enough. So they thought about what can they do more, and what they did was actually two different initiatives. One was a fairly regular mini survey, which had just two questions on the leader, and the one question was, what is Scott actually doing great at the moment, or what has he done great in the last 2 weeks? And then the second question was, what could he do to be even greater? So two very positive questions, obviously positively phrased, very simple, but in a fairly high frequency, and that helped to give a frequent stream of feedback and of transparency to Scott or to John or whoever the leader is. And then the second part is the ability for Scott to do ad hoc deep dives and ad hoc survey to people who he feels at the moment they are in a good position to provide me very, very good insights into how I might have developed in one of many areas. And so they have different templates they can use for the survey to cover different areas of development, whether it's communication, whether it's access to resources, or whatever culture, or whatever the topic is. They choose the topic, they invite the people, and they get immediately results back, and they can work with the results directly. And this is outside of hierarchies and team setups. That's the survey respondents are invited by the manager and picked by the manager. And so that's a good example, which is quite similar to something that I'm using, which if you want, I can actually show it to you right now.
Yeah, sure. I think we're going to take a little bit of a chance here, aren't we? I'm going to make you the presenter, and then
Thank you very much. Thanks, Scott. So can you see my screen?
I can indeed, yeah.
Very good. So actually what this shows is the tool that I'm using a little bit it's with demo data, so it's not the real data, but it's quite similar in terms of the look and feel of the solution. And this gives me the possibility to see a regular beat of my team, but it also gives me the opportunity to ask for ad hoc feedback if I feel I need to, and I can pick the people. And why don't we look at how this actually works? So here I can see this is like my ask section where I can look at all the different things that I've been asking in the past. So there are different templates, for example, the digital readiness template where everybody participated in my team. And I have chosen to do a quarterly check. I could do this more often, but for me that's fine to do it quarterly in terms of my leadership capabilities and how the people experience that. So it's time for my Q3 check, and why don't we go ahead and schedule that? So I want to work on the team performance and choose that template. I call it my check Q3 2018, not very creative maybe. And I want to ask the ENPS question, and I choose now the areas which I feel are relevant at the moment. I leave out the health check, I take all the other ones, and scroll down a little bit here. Psychological safety, obstacles, maybe not delivery. Those are the areas where I want to get feedback. And now I have to choose from whom. I can take groups. For example, my team is a group, or the management team I'm in is a group, or it could be any other team, or actually any number of people can form a group. But I can also select individual participants. Let's start, for example, with Volker as one I want to get feedback from. I add him. I select maybe Cosima for feedback. And then finally, I've worked a lot with Kamil recently. Maybe he's a good one to give me good insights. And for some self-reflection, I actually add myself. And now I can go through the invitations. I take the standards and the reminders, save this. And this is all I have to do in order to prepare a survey, send it out. And it has been created successfully. And now there's a new tile here representing my new latest survey waiting for respondents. So obviously this takes a few minutes until people react and open up, and a few days maybe even. Why don't we take the time and look into my results in last check in Q2. So if I go on this little chart icon, I see a little dashboard here. And this shows me the different dimensions and how people have rated. Green, dark green is very top rating, red is very critical rating. I can see the area of resources, for example, with the individual questions here, and I can look and see what was the challenge and why did people vote not so high. One of the areas here is psychological safety. That stood out as one of the not so positive ones. I've read a recent article about Google teams. Psychological safety is very critical and important for them, so maybe I look into that. And if I look at all the questions here, we can talk about mistakes in my team. I think we touched on that recently, so this is an area which we should work on, or I should work on here in this example data, and maybe create some actions around this. So this shows how I get the results. Very simple, very easy, but insightful. And if I want to work on the results, I can go into my action board. This action board shows the current tasks which I'm active on. It shows tasks I've completed in the past. And I can create new tasks. And this is a collaboration tool. So I create tasks, other people can comment them, the people in my team can rate them, they can refine them, we can delegate tasks, we can share them, I can share them with peers. It's all very easy. And on this psychological safety and learning from mistakes, I create a task called Celebrate Learning Meetings. So that's something with a typo, which I'm correcting. And now this is created, and I can open it up to maybe give it a little bit of a better definition. Monthly meeting to learn from mistakes, use specific examples, and so on. So I can describe it a little bit and actually assign a deadline. Maybe I want to track myself a little bit. Maybe end of the month shall be the first meeting. I can also share this not only with the people who responded, but also maybe with an individual user. Daniel is usually good in giving hints and his insight. He's one of the great leaders in our team. And then here is a comment area. I can enter my own comment, or people can comment it, and so therefore it's a good collaboration tool here. And then obviously, once I've started this, I can move this over, and then it becomes my active action. One of my active actions, I can complete it and move it to the right to show that I've made progress and at least completed the actions. So that's how I handle feedback when I do deep dives, when I create ad hoc feedbacks. But I also have this embedded in our feedback landscape. So we do, for example, an annual engagement survey. I can see the results from the latest wave there. We also have this weekly beat where I get a sentiment of my team on a weekly basis. Actually, maybe if in reality the sentiment would drop over 4 weeks, 5 weeks, like here, it's probably a good idea then to do those deep dives, not only on a quarterly basis, but maybe then some areas on a monthly basis to understand what's driving that. I can see the actions in my entire organization, can see which ones are top rated, can discuss those, can see the progress those. So this gives me full transparency, not only on the opinion of the people and the experience, but also on the actions we're taking as an organization and how we're progressing. Does that make sense, Scott?
Yeah, I think so. And you know, what struck me as you were taking us through that demo is this is clearly something that you as an individual leader are driving yourself. You know, you're getting the feedback from the team, you're reviewing it with the team, you're taking actions, you're involving other people from around the business. So you know, in that way, you're not waiting for the annual survey to be done by HR or anybody else. You're taking that control yourself.
No, this tool is so easy that I can use it myself, and I'm not scared by it, so I don't need to program or do fancy things. I can do it myself, and it helps me actually. But by sending out these surveys myself, it adds a lot of credibility to it that the opinion counts, and by taking those actions, by involving the team in the action design and the execution of the actions, that adds to that credibility, which I think, like, trust is one of the themes that I think are very, very important, and this adds and pays on this trust.
Yeah, and that thing that we mentioned, trust through transparency. I mean, I think it's critical to share this with the team. I mean, your other approach would be for you to have a look at it, decide the actions, and then share the actions with the team. But actually, what you're doing here is creating this way forward with the team.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, fantastic. Well, thanks for that. I'll take control back, I hope. So let me just shuffle those. That went very well for a live demo in the middle of a webinar, actually. Quite pleased with that. Right, let's carry on and wrap up. I wanted to finish up on a couple of things. We always have time for a couple of questions at the end. Just wrapping up into 5 practical things that people can do. You know, I think starting off with empowering, you know, your own team to be more agile, making sure that they're accountable is a good place. We looked at that transition from just being a leader or just being a manager to combining those hats, I think you call them, where we're adding that coaching piece into it as well. Another one of these little phrases that seem to crop up every now and again: learn to listen and listen to learn. And I think this is key. As individual leaders, we do have to learn to listen. Quite often we're used to telling people, giving commands, setting direction, all of those things. But we have to learn to listen on the way back. And if we listen properly, then we learn a lot more. I think. We touched on being supportive, both as an individual leader and as an organisation, and we had that great discussion about, learning from your own mistakes, learning from other people's mistakes, and lastly, building trust through transparency. Does that sort of cover most of the things? Is there anything you'd pull out of there as being more important than anything else?
I actually, from my personal experience, I would say at the beginning, it might feel harder, but once you learn the power of the team and, for example, involving your team in decisions, involving your team in taking responsibility and what needs to change, it becomes easier actually for you as a leader. And that was for me a big relief that actually I don't need to be in control all the time, and I have so great people around me in my team. They're happy to take this responsibility. They're happy to support this, and it makes your life easier and not more difficult. So I encourage everybody, and I think that's a good thing to remind the leaders in your organization, that it might feel hard at the beginning because it's a change, but it actually makes your life a lot easier, and that's good news for everybody.
So get going and stick with it. Really, I guess. Time for questions. We've had a couple of questions come into the chat facility, and actually one of them you just started to talk about a little bit. What's the very first step that somebody could take? Where should they start?
Yeah, I think they should start with themselves actually. So if you want to change anything, I think if you're responsible in an HR function in an organization, change with or start with a change in HR. And the first manager in HR who can change is actually yourself. And I think take a little bit of time and see from all the different things that can be changed, what is this first step you want to make? And then involve your team quickly in terms of what they think the team should do different from next Monday, from next day on, whatever, and show the way. I think that's good, and that is probably the biggest thing. Make a first step, and then be open what comes next. Listen, and the traditional way is you set goals and then you try to measure whether you have achieved those goals, but with this change, I think it's a little bit different. You need to constantly listen to see whether your goal is still the right goal and whether you need to change that. But again, start with yourself, start with your own function, start with your own team, and then try to convince others.
Okay, fantastic. Well, we're right up against time now.
Yeah.
Please do send in your additional questions. As I've said, if you want the slides, please get in touch. If you'd like me or Matthias to speak, come and speak with your team, or if you'd like me to come and speak at one of your events, very, very happy to do that. This whole webinar, this particular one, came around because of a conversation I had with somebody that took the time to reach out after the last webinar. So we are a feedback company. We listen very hard and try to replay some of this. Matthias, thank you very, very much for your time today, for joining us from Cologne.
Very well. Was very a pleasure and good conversation. Hope to see you next time in person here, and we can do this again.
Yep, looking forward to that. And thanks very much, everybody, for listening or watching, whether you're listening to this on the live broadcast or whether you're playing catch up and watching the recording afterward. Again, just thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next time. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.